No. No, nobody. Nobody can. Sugar Bowl coming up today at 4 o'clock. That is this round's Patreon stream. They vote over there in the Sugar Bowl, which, of course, was supposed to be played yesterday, has been postponed till today at 4 o'clock. We'll be live streaming on Patreon at 4. The link will be posted around 3:30. Just head on over to the Patreon page. Click the link at the top of the Patreon page that says Sugar Bowl Patreon stream, Georgia versus Notre Dame, and it'll take you to the live stream. The Patreon link is in the description of this video. That's 4 o'clock today. But so Ohio State absolutely destroyed Oregon yesterday. And, the obvious kind of question coming out of that game is really the same question coming out of the Tennessee game, if you watched Ohio State in that game. And that is, if Ohio State plays at that level, is there even anybody in the playoffs that can beat them? And honestly, I don't think there is. One of the sort of, I don't even know really what to call it, but one of the talking points, I guess, around Ohio State this year, the $20 million roster and they bring in Caleb Downs and Will Howard at quarterback and all the NFL wide receivers. They get Quinshon Judkins at running back to go along with Trayvon Henderson, in addition to a defense loaded with NFL stars, and then they lose to Oregon. And then they play really bad against Nebraska. They get the win, but, they got dominated along the lines of scrimmage. And then, they lose the Michigan game. And one of the things that made that so hard to understand is the fact that we all know and knew how talented of a roster Ohio State had. And that really was the crux of the argument against Ryan Day over the majority of the season, was the whole, well, if he's not going to win with this team, what are they going to do? I mean, they can't get any more talented, really, than they are right now. And he still can't beat Michigan. And that was sort of the whole, is he going to get fired? And, I know everybody, myself included, and the Ohio State fans are now like, oh, God, Ohio State, they're unbeatable. They're the best team on the planet. And I'm doing it too. But even the Ohio State fans a month ago, coming off of that loss to Michigan, a lot of them were done with Ryan Day. And the thing is, what we have seen Ohio State do to Tennessee in the first round of the playoffs and now Oregon in the second round, that's why there was so much criticism heaped upon Ryan Day, the coaching staff, and Ohio State as a team, I think, over the course of the season, is because they are this good. When you look at the roster, it is the best roster in college football. It was the best roster in the preseason. It was the best roster during the season. It's the best roster now. Yet you watch them play over the course of the season, and they seem to suffer from a couple of different things. One is sort of the up and down yo-yo effect that we saw from a lot of teams this year, Georgia included, Notre Dame included, who played today. You got teams that look borderline unbeatable one week, and then the next week, they look unrecognizable. It's like, what, this team isn't any good. Where's the team I saw last week? Notre Dame runs the table almost. Who was their loss to? Was it to Texas A&M? No. Was it to a ranked Navy or Army team? No. Was it against their rival at the end of the year, Southern Cal? No. It was to Northern Illinois. You look at Georgia. They go on the road, beat Texas by 2 touchdowns. SEC championship game, they beat Texas, come from behind with a backup quarterback and beat them. And you're like, yeah, this Georgia team pretty good. Defense all over Quinn Ewers, right? Same Georgia team goes to Ole Miss, can't get a first down. Same Georgia team goes to Bama, gets absolutely demolished in the first half of that game. The game was over 15 minutes into the game. I know Georgia came back in the second half. We've been over all that. So Ohio State suffered from a little bit of that this year too, right? Now, their loss to Oregon early on, I actually think up until the Tennessee and now the Oregon game in the playoffs, I actually thought that Ohio State's loss at Oregon was the best game they played all year. By far. They beat Indiana, and, you can think what you think of that game or think what you think of Indiana or whatever, but I actually think Ohio State played better in a loss at Oregon than they did in a win against Indiana. They've got the win over Penn State. Now, the win over Penn State looks really good now. Penn State's rolling, especially offensively. The last couple of weeks of Penn State's offense is probably the best I've seen Penn State's offense look in a decade. But in that game, it was the same kind of thing. Penn State couldn't get a first down. Ohio State beat them by a touchdown or 10 points, whatever it was. And I'm not saying Ohio State played bad in that game, but I think they played better in that loss at Oregon. Then you had the Nebraska game, which they probably should have lost. They got completely dominated along the lines of scrimmage, a lot of boneheaded plays. Nebraska had the ball at the end with a chance to win the game. They didn't do it. Credit to Ohio State. They got the win. And then you had the absolute failure, which was Michigan. And we've dissected that a million ways from Sunday. It's pretty obvious what happened there. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and the coaching staff decided they wanted to prove a point, which is that they can play Michigan football and beat Michigan. And, of course, that ended up not being the case. If Ohio State comes out and just throws the ball around, slings it around like they have the last couple of weeks, they beat that Michigan team. But they didn't do that. Michigan's in their head. They decided they'd rather prove a point than win the game. And they ended up they did neither. They didn't prove a point and they didn't win the game. But I think they played really well in that loss at Oregon. But these last two games from Ohio State, that is a Ferrari running at full speed. And I don't think there's a team left in college football that can compete with that. And I don't know, maybe that's not a hot take after seeing what Ohio State has done in each of their last two games against teams that I think are pretty good. I think Tennessee's a pretty good team. And, if you're an Ohio State fan and you're saying, Tennessee sucks or Oregon sucks, well, then that would mean those aren't impressive wins. Tennessee and Oregon are good teams. Oregon's a really good team. Really, Oregon's loaded with NFL talent. Oregon's got a great coaching staff. Oregon's got a great quarterback. NFL players are all over the field on both sides of the ball. Oregon has all that. And Ohio State absolutely destroyed them. The first 20 minutes of that game is some of the most dominating football you'll ever see. It was unbelievable to watch yesterday. Ohio State is playing at a level right now that if they are able to maintain, I don't think there's a team left that can compete with that. I just don't think it's nothing. Look, Georgia and Notre Dame are good teams. You can crap in the comments section if you want. Oh, Georgia's no good. Georgia's terrible. Notre Dame's no good. Notre Dame's terrible. Maybe you think Penn State's terrible. Maybe you think Texas is terrible. Whatever teams are left. They're all good teams. They ain't good enough. The only team left in the playoffs that can beat Ohio State is Ohio State. Ohio State would have to come out and make a lot of mistakes. Maybe Will Howard has an off day. It would have to be a combination of like Will Howard I don't see the wide receivers having an off day. Like, I don't see a scenario where Ohio State's wide receivers drop 7 passes in a game. Like, that ain't going to happen. In order for Ohio State to lose at this point, it's going to take a combination of maybe Will Howard having an off day for whatever reason, and a defense that's able to control the Ohio State line of scrimmage and in turn limit their run game so that you're able to kind of stall them offensively. And I just don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, Ohio State they might have the best running game in the country and the best passing game in the country. And I really don't know the last time we saw a team. There was a couple of Alabama teams in the late 2010s that could run the ball really, really well and had high-level quarterback play. The 2020 team, Mac Jones at quarterback, and a few of those other teams, too, where they had Heisman-worthy type QBs maybe and some all-time great wide receivers. Think about Jamison Williams, Devontae Smith, just the long list of wide receivers that Alabama had there in like the late 2010s. Combined with some good quarterback play and NFL running backs. But I don't know that it was even on this level. The LSU team from 2019 that a lot of people like to talk about, Joe Burrow, all-time great season, better than Will Howard for sure. But they didn't have the run game to go with it. They had a good running game. They didn't have Ohio State's running game. And they didn't have Ohio State's defense. And that's kind of that kind of gets left out a little, I think, when people talk about Ohio State. The conversation tends to center around Ryan Day, the wide receivers, and Will Howard, and then maybe people will just casually throw out, $20 million roster, blah, blah, blah. They kind of just skim over the fact Jim Knowles, defensive coordinators, completely turned that thing around the last 2 or 3 years, playing at a really high level. They shut Oregon down. I know Oregon scored a couple of touchdowns there, I think, into the first half or start of the second half, and people are thinking, here comes the comeback. There was never going to be a comeback in that game. Ohio State, I mean, when they hit the gas pedal in the first quarter of that game, Oregon did not have a gear to keep up with what was happening. And again, that's not a slight on Oregon. Oregon is a really good team. Oregon was the only team in the country to go 12-0 in a regular season, 13-0 with a Big Ten title. They beat this Ohio State team. They beat this Ohio State team in a game where Ohio State played good. It's not a Michigan scenario. And again, I don't want to take anything away from Michigan beating Ohio State. It's a huge win for Michigan. They follow that up with a big win against Alabama. So again, I'm not here to shit on Michigan either, but like even Michigan fans know this wasn't a great year for Michigan. It just wasn't. But they beat Ohio State. But so this Ohio State, this seems like a 30-second video that I'm turning into a 10-minute video, but who's going to beat them? The Ohio State-Texas line came out. It started at around 4.5. Ohio State favored by 4.5. I couldn't believe it. It's already up to 6. By the time you watch this video, it might even be higher. Forget beating Ohio State. I don't know that there's a team that can come within a couple of touchdowns of Ohio State. I like Notre Dame. They got a good defense. They got a good running game. Riley Leonard is a competent quarterback who's probably not going to lose them any games. Jeremiah Love is amazing. They can't keep up with Notre Dame offensively. Georgia's got a defense that if they're able to pressure Will Howard could potentially cause some problems, but teams have run on Georgia all year. So Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins probably would have a field day against Georgia. And the danger of rushing Will Howard is you're leaving 3 NFL wide receivers with one-on-one coverage. Only one of them has to win. Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and Carnell Tate, those are all 3 Sunday players that happen to still be on Ohio State's team. And in the case of Jeremiah Smith, we got to deal with him for 2 more years. He's a true freshman. So it's a pick your poison thing with Ohio State. Texas got beat up by Arizona State. I don't think Texas is good enough on their best day to beat Ohio State. And I don't think Texas is going to have their best day against Ohio State, coming off of a tough, emotional, overtime, physical game against Arizona State where they got a little beat. Scatteraboo beat them up. You don't tackle Cam Scatteraboo. Scatteraboo runs into you, and sometimes he falls down. Now, the problem is sometimes he doesn't, and he keeps running. But, so Texas is going to be beat up. A lot of questions about the future of the quarterback position there. Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, are they both staying? Are they both leaving? Is one leaving? Is one staying? There's just a lot. They're not beating Ohio State. So Ohio State's going to be in the Natty after they beat Texas. They're either going to play Georgia, Notre Dame, or Penn State. Penn State might be the second best team left in this thing. It's another team that offensively seems to have found another level out of nowhere here over the last couple of weeks. Now, we could talk about the competition if we want to. They beat up on SMU and Boise State, 2 of what a lot of people consider to be the worst of the 12 playoff teams. But still, have you watched Penn State at all over the last 5 years? The offense that they are putting on the field right now and the way they're performing right now offensively is better than anything I've seen them do in years. So I don't know. But look what happened last time they played Ohio State. Penn State couldn't get a first down against Ohio State. 0 offensive touchdowns. The only score they had was a pick 6. So I don't know. I'm not here to crown Ohio State national champions 3 weeks before the national title game. And like you, I'm going to watch the rest of the playoff games too. And I'm going to hope for good games. And can Ohio State be beat? Yeah, but you're gonna have to. It's gonna have to be some self-inflicted problems for Ohio State. If every single team left in the playoffs plays at their absolute ceiling, Ohio State's ceiling is 2 touchdowns higher than anyone else's. They can beat anybody in this field by 2 touchdowns if they play up to their potential and at their ceiling. Can they do it? Well, that's why they make you play the games. We'll see. But, boy, they're going to be hard to beat. All right, I'll be back on around 3:45 today for the Sugar Bowl, Georgia versus Notre Dame, the last of the second-round quarterfinal playoff games. The winner, of course, will advance to the Orange Bowl to take on Penn State. That stream will be on the Patreon page. I'll post a link over on Patreon around 3:30 or 3:45. The link to my Patreon page is in the description of this video, so check it out. It's half off right now, too, for New Year's over on Patreon. So check it out, and I'll see y'all at 4 for the Sugar Bowl. Have a good morning.